Hello everybody, welcome to my channel. Now I'd like to talk about Linux Mint. This is the distribution that I recommend for people new to Linux or for people who just want a desktop operating system which respects their privacy and which just works and very easy to use. And Linux Mint is great because you really don't have to know how Linux works, how your computer works. You can just really use it as you're used to use Windows or Mac, even Mac. Uh, there is a misconception that if you have Linux, you have to use the terminal a lot. You have to know the terminal commands. This is not true. I'm a geek. I love the terminal. I love Linux, so I do as much work as possible in the terminal. But not everybody is like that. And Linux Mint is really the closest thing to Windows in the Linux world. In that regard, that the desktop environment, especially with Cinnamon, let's see here, Linux Mint Cinnamon. This desktop environment is the most familiar for people coming from Windows, and most people come from Windows because most people use Windows. And the desktop environment is very familiar. By default, Linux Mint has all the tools installed that you need. Uh, every tool for multimedia playback, for burning CDs, for ripping CDs, for burning USB, bootable USB drives, whatever. Everything is there. And it works very well with a wide variety of hardware. At least, for example, I have a Dell laptop here, and its touchpad works best with Linux Mint. With every other distribution, it has some weird sensibility issue. But Linux Mint is the reason Linux Mint is that good is that it really just works and it gets out of your way. If you don't want to learn about Linux, you just want a privacy respecting open source operating system, Linux Mint is for you. It lets to concentrate on your job, on whatever you want to do. Because, for example, the reason I run Fedora and the reason I prefer Arch, the reason I'm not on Linux Mint is because when I use my Linux machine, I want to learn about Linux. I want to mess around with Linux. I want to use I use the terminal a lot. I'm playing around with something called i3, which is not even a desktop environment. It means there is no start menu or icons. It's just a window manager, which means all you have is your Windows, and you have to configure everything in configuration files, and I love it. But not everybody is like me. So, for example, if I had to install Linux for my parents, for anybody who is not a geek, I would install Linux Mint for them. For example, Switch to Linux on YouTube. He's a front-end web developer and he does his entire work on Linux Mint. And his reason is that Linux Mint just works, it doesn't break, it's rock solid, it gets out of your way. And that's why I also like Linux Mint, especially Linux Mint Cinnamon. But as I have said, when I use Linux, I want to learn about Linux, I want to mess around, and that's why Linux Mint is for me boring. Beautiful, but boring. And if you just want to get your job done, you want a boring distribution, which just works. But I want a distribution which is more cutting edge or maybe even bleeding edge. So that's why I prefer Fedora Arch. Yeah, I think that's it for today about Linux Mint. I just wanted to put it out because it's really a big discussion in the Linux world, which distribution is the best for new users or for inexperienced users, and I say it's Linux Mint. If you just want a system that just works and not Linux itself, if the subject of your interest is not Linux itself, but you want to get work done on Linux, Linux Mint is for you. If the subject of your interest is Linux itself, if you want to understand how Linux works, if you want to learn, if you want to mess around with configurations, with software and stuff, it might not be the best option for you, but everybody is different. Linux Mint is great. It's a fantastic Linux distribution. Without any hesitation, I would install Linux Mint on the machine of my parents or my grandma even. So yeah, that's it. Goodbye.